Dorothy Barresi, welcome to Poetry.LA. I'm so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. It is my honor. I am in awe of the series and of what they've done for Los Angeles poets, and of course I'm in awe of you, so I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's my honor to have you, and this is a real treat to get the listeners and viewers to learn a little bit more about you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask whether you would start us off with a poem.
Sure. All right. I'm going to start with fire.
Bring the fire. We need that.
Okay. This is called LAPD, and I will say that a kind woman who was reading my manuscript before I had it buried in the book, and she said, "Oh no, this has to be in the first few."
Move it up.
Yeah, from the book What We Did While We Made More Guns, which is the most recent book. So this is LAPD, and it's basically a persona poem. The LAPD are speaking. We are waylaid and slaughtered for our beauty. We rattle palm fronds, siren the sick limb in any airless night, cut it off. We kick high, correct clocks and the poor on the stoop in their Nike shower shoes, cursing intractabilities. A still boy who, muttering to himself all morning, paced the center divide, palsied, rope burned by exhaust, cooperates now fully at our feet. We are the fuck that matters. We protect sightlines, we serve sightlines. Here lies. We jack conviction, smile. Consent decree, all inconsolable people look the same. Wrung hair, eaten face, tears. Consent decree, all inconsolable people sound the same, like supernatural whale cries off the shiftless Pacific plying April's migration routes north. Why do they home here? Instinct. Why, if not to save themselves and blue the air and the hour of kicked down doors and the body camera turns us on? If only it showed our faces. We are that beautiful. We afterward Los Angeles. We marry a jury of our peers. Your Honor. Even when he walked backwards, then kneeled as instructed, with his hands on the back of his head as instructed, and lying prone as instructed, kept his hands on the back of his head as instructed, face eating the burning tar. I was afraid, as instructed, for my life. No one is perfect here. We jack the need that fucks us up. We bruise wrists. We kick, drink one wife, one husband at a time. We are transparent. Our faces no longer appear in the mirrors that shave us or put on our makeup. Call us carefully. Red sirens, skin nights, feedback loop. A service revolver is only as good as its lawyer. In San Pedro, Crenshaw, Montecito Heights, El Sereno, the valley of the shadow of the Deathward Mall, and the all-night plasma drop-in centers. We trouble slaughter. We carry your eviction. We are on your hands. Let it be on your head, our beauty, when we come riding, towing the line.
Thank you for sharing that haunting and difficult and amazing poem with us. It strikes me as so timely as we sit here conducting this interview on the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And it strikes me that What We Did While We Made More Guns, published in 2018, is as timely today as it was when you published it. And I wonder about your thoughts generally about the relationship of poetry to current cultural and political events, how you marry those two and how poetry can be in service of that.
I think poetry, on some level, has to be in service to that. And in the matter of the death of George Floyd, we can only look at the sweep of current history up until this moment now, and there's just one more name to add to that list. It's horrifying. And, you know, I said to my husband at some point along the way, I'm like, when did the police become a firing squad? When did that happen? I'm actually going to read a poem about a murder by police that took place in Akron, my hometown, last year. And I think that the poetry that's always mattered to me is the poetry that engages the current moment. I try to come at it humbly because I'm only one person and I can only do what I can do. So there's my limitations. But I think in a poem, you try to carry not only an intellectual charge, an idea charge, but try to carry an emotional charge as well. And I think that really good poetry, on some sense, is an act of convincing the reader that they belong in the moment of the poem and that they're going to be taken someplace new, or they're going to find themselves in the poem and say, that's it, that's what I was thinking about. Whatever engagement I can get, I'll get gladly. And as you can see from that poem, I'm not the most subtle poet in the world.
This is not calling for subtlety, because the incident was not subtle, or incidents, plural, were not subtle.
Right, and I've spoken when I was teaching at Cal State Northridge in the last few years. I would refer to Kira Walker's, an article about Kira Walker's art, and it was called After Subtlety. Right. And that idea that we now live in a post-subtle moment, I think, is valid, and I embrace that. But then I have to say, I've always kind of embraced that. That's just, I don't know why, as a writer, I just, I want to grab the reader on some level.
I love what Lynn Emanuel says on the blurb on the back of the book, which speaks to your ethical indignation. And I thought, oh, she got that term so right. Do you agree with that assessment as you approach these issues?
That's a very kind thing to say, and I embrace it with all my heart, because here's the thing, and I think I said something in our workshop group that we've been involved in for a long time. When I look at the poems from my early years, I'm like, oh, I was so fascinated by myself and my family and all that, and I think you have to, get that out in the early books, But I'm less interested in me and more interested in witnessing, I guess you could say. Absolutely. And so that ethical indignation, which, thank you, Lynn Emanuel, that's so awesome, suits, because I go through my day going, how could that have happened? Why? I mean, why? Where are we at?
Exactly.
Yes. There seems to be, is it just because there's so much more news nowadays, a 24-hour cycle? But I seem to always be indignant about something.
I was thinking that the other day, is that we think we know more than we knew 25 years ago because of news cycles, because of social media, all of that we're exposed to, and then we're trying to ferret out, is that really accurate? It's just such a struggle to just deal with the truth of what's going on around us.
Yes.
And that in itself, I would think, leads to a certain kind of ethical indignation.
Yes, the death of truth. Right?
Exactly. The other thing I was thinking about, and when I was rereading what we did while we made more guns, especially in the eponymous poem in the collection, am I wrong in thinking how critical tone is to these poems? Because it seems as though, and one of our fellow poets that we work with in workshops said, be sure to ask Dorothy about the leaps and juxtapositions of images alongside occasional humor in the language. Can you talk to that, maybe just an overall craft philosophy that you have?
I think my first sort of goal is to never bore the reader. And so I'm looking to create something that is has a complex surface, if you will,
Yes.
and that will, which speaks to the juxtapositions you're talking about, and that will jolt somebody without it feeling like it doesn't belong in the poem. And that's maybe a little tricky, and I don't know that I always do it correctly, but in what we did while we made more guns, there's a kind of reportorial telling, but the speaker becomes swept along, and it becomes sort of darker as it goes along. So it builds a little quietly, and then it sort of grows from there. And I think that there, as far as tone goes, first of all, I don't want people to see where the poem is going to go from the get-go. I would like to surprise them as they go along, and so I can't sort of reveal in tone everything right off the bat usually. So usually I think in my case, except for the poem that I just read, right, I don't want to, how can I say this? I want to carry the reader, I guess, is what I want to say. And so the tone is something that I'm aware of, in that I want, almost in a sneaky way, to sort of begin in some place and then lift off perhaps in another place. So
and is that something that you think of from the beginning, or is this in the revision process?
I think, I revise 1,000 times, and remember the days when we typed out everything, right? And you just type it, retype it. But I actually love the revision process, and so much happens in that because I'm constantly sort of taking it aside and reading it out loud.
Yes.
And that's where I think that I can sort of see where tone begins and where it might start to build a little bit, and draw the reader in unexpected ways.
I think this is the perfect time for you to read us another poem.
Okay, cool. I think since I mentioned the incident that took place in Akron, Ohio, my hometown, I'll read this. And as I said to folks after I wrote this, I said I read it to my students at CSUN, and I said I don't even know if I have permission to read this, to write this poem, but I wanted to write it because I wanted to add my ethical indignation and outrage to this, and this is sort of right from the news last year in my hometown, and like most people's hometowns, it is both ordinary and extraordinary, and it's also a hometown that the industry of rubber tires, Firestone, Goodyear, Goodrich, that left in the 70s, and so there's these hulking sort of Gothic factories downtown. The city had to sort of resurrect itself from there, and so you'll hear a little bit of that. Mr. Jayland Walker is dead of 90 decisions made near the entrance to the I-80 by 8 policemen, resulting in 60 wounds to one body so plainly riddled. Entrance was exit, and exit entrance. He was only 25. Though his own traffic violation went unspecified near 3 dead rubber factories hanging silence before bicentennial bunting hung bedraggled like caution tape over downtown, all lit up now by sodium lights of the Rubber Ducks minor league baseball stadium. Akron is rising, presided over by a cold moon, June 27th, 2022, and 8 men roused to something they called duty, 5 on the force less than 2.5 years, as their lurching collective staggered weight and outstretched intractabilities aimed a young man running empty-handed down a green stretch of Summer's Listen, not far from the childish hill of the Soapbox Derby, and the Catholic school gym where LeBron levitated Godhead, just a mile, maybe less, from the place Sojourner Truth asked her one world-changing question, if it were a different world than the one where 8 policemen agree, Mr. Walker assumed a firing position while running away from them as fast as he could. In the shadow of the Inventors Hall of Fame Middle School, where no fraction of Mr. Walker's assumption is visible on the partial body cam recording. It is always a partial recording, about which the city's mayor warns this will be hard to watch. Meaning, does it, that Mr. Jalen Walker's 2 eyes remain open, watching us watch for another 246 years, the commonplace appalling.
You've taken my breath away with that poem, and I was thinking of 2 things at once. One being the poem itself. I loved the phrase "Summers listen."
Thank you.
I don't think I've ever heard that before. And again, so amazed by what you do syntactically, where you talk about the 80 decisions, and then there's something in the middle of that before you get to by 8 policemen.
Yeah.
And just that syntactical choice of how the story is presented. So kudos for that.
Thank you.
As you led up to the poem, though, you were talking about the question in your mind of the permission to write it, and I think that's a question facing a lot of poets these days that tackle these sorts of subjects.
Right.
And also that you had read it to the class. And so I'm interested in hearing about your thoughts about the permission issue, but also how your students reacted to it, to the poem.
And, you know, obviously I'm not Black, and so and Mr. Jalen Walker, who everybody in Akron now just refers to by his first name, Jalen, because everybody in Akron now carries this, as well as the country does, of course. But because I'm not Black, I don't know how much, well, I want to lend witness, and I want to address the topic, and I want to, for those people who maybe don't know the story, I want to bring that story to them in an interesting and evocative way. But it's not my personal experience, and so I get nervous about that. I think that whichever art you're making, whatever discipline or genre, it's always about granting yourself permission. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, one doesn't want to overstep. And so it's complicated, right? It's complicated. On the other hand, I did ask actually a couple of classes that I was teaching at Cal State Northridge. I read the poem for them because they're always showing me their poems. So I think every once in a while I probably should put myself in the, in the fire. And so I asked them that question: do I have the right? And kids are amazing these days, right? They're just like, yeah, cool, it's cool, yeah, it's fine. And I'm like, is it not like a little? And they were kind of like, hey, bring it. Yes. You don't seem to be overstepping. You don't seem to be, owning something that you can't own.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the question I wanted to ask you, because after, I think you said, 38 years teaching at CSUN.
35 and a couple of years in North Carolina before that. So I'm
many years of teaching.
Yes.
And you have recently made the decision to retire from that position. And given what you're saying about the back and forth with the students, specifically with relationship to your own work and ways of seeing the world to bring into your work, how is that retirement resonating with you?
I will not lie, uppermost is a great deal of just kind of relief, because heavy teaching schedule and, every semester it's sort of Sisyphusian task, and I always tried to do a good job. And so I don't have to meet those demands, right? And that is kind of relieving in some way. And I'm trying to take that into my writing now, and coming into my writing with a little bit more openness, a kind of like, hey, I can do whatever I want. I got all the, And I don't want to say all the time in the world because that's provoking the gods. I don't want to do that. But I miss, of course, the back and forth. We have we're in a workshop that we've been in, I think, some 20 years now or whatever, and we get a lot of conversation going. But it's a little different from that sort of ever-changing bunch of young people coming through who, you know, would challenge me and refresh me and you know, delight me and also perturb me or whatever. But I I think that I had a lot of it, and I cherish it, and I'm going forward. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I'm like I told my therapist a couple of weeks ago. I said, I think I'm going to choose to be happy. As like corny as that sounds, and I think that one can only sort of embrace that when you've got a little time to yourself to catch your breath. Yeah.
And given that, and you've read us a new poem today, I'm wondering, do you have a new project in mind, a new group of poems in mind? What are you working on now that CSUN isn't the front and center responsibility anymore?
Exactly. Actually, before I left CSUN, I had gotten a sabbatical to write about the Exide Technologies industrial contamination, lead contamination of a really large swath of East LA. And again, permission, because I don't live there, so I'm not writing from inside the experience. But I'm lending witness to what I have researched and know and can bring sort of language to in a way that I hope is evocative. And I've been writing poems towards I think probably a chapter in whenever my next book is, right? I think a chapter, and it may be a standalone chapbook before that or something like that, about this lead contamination and the ongoing challenge of the thousands upon thousands of people who are living with that on a daily basis, who may be pregnant and are scared, who are developing breathing issues, their children reading delays. It goes on and on.
And now that you have a little bit more free time,
I do.
I'm wondering what particular poets or type of poetics you're reading now that might have a bearing on what you're working.
I love political poetry, and I'm drawn to it. But I think that the phrase political is a sort of very large umbrella in some sense, because I think that any poem that speaks out of the day, out of the current moment, out of wherever that poet is at the moment, is in some sense political, right? And but I am reading for my own edification, Natalie Diaz's post-colonial love song. But I've been reading other things too. My Hollywood, I've been reading. I always have a stack of books. I'm reading Mary Zibist. I'm all over the place. Robin Cost Lewis, though, I'm reading the Place of Perfect Helplessness.
Helplessness.
Yes, I'm reading that. I'm sort of diving in all over the place.
All over the place.
Yeah. I dip in, and that helps keep me fresh in a way. I like to read people who are writing in ways I don't necessarily write, so that I can challenge my own default settings and try to do something new.
Well, with that effort to read as broadly and be impacted as broadly, we'd love to close out by hearing this new poem that you were referencing.
Okay, and this is, as I was saying before, is so new that it has pencil marks on it. I can attest to that from last night at about 2 a.m. So
you will be forgiven for that. A work in progress. We love that.
Indeed.
The premiere.
This takes place in a moment after Exide Technologies, which, by the way, was a lead battery, a car battery smelting plant right in the middle of these residential neighborhoods. So they were melting down lead batteries. And they eventually, of course, proposed bankruptcy, and they were awarded bankruptcy. And so the phrase is that the order of bankruptcy was not stayed. So it continues. And I was shook when I was reading about the fact that, well, as you'll see in the poem, that that dissolves all of their responsibility.
Yes, absolves them.
Absolves them.
Absolutely.
Yes, okay. So the title is Because the Bankruptcy Order Was Not Stayed. 1. It is official. Exide has ceased to exist as a business furnace and runnel of lead for 20 years. Proud history-denying concern now formally dissolved into parkway, waterway, lobe and alveoli, blood breath, nerve sway, fetal sac, all the crossings over. Exide is gone. We can curse the unforgivable no longer in their name. It has been released from deep time and the spiritual materiality of language. Specifically, no responsibility for past, present, or future stillborn children with advanced graveyard telepathy can attach to any name we once thought we knew. The dead must go where they will now, unaccompanied, still and still and still. 2. God boasted a physical body once, remember, for a relatively short running time 2,000 years ago, but its remains and residuals, its residue, if you will, though you have no say in the matter, seeped into every pore of our unknowing at the very entry point of human being, and it pours through us still. Think of it this way. A nail always finds a decimated God, then somehow finds us. Cost of doing business, Exide would say. Nerve-bracked, wave form, fetal sac, breath of dust on a Tuesday a.m., too goddamn hot for the season, via air's least glance and runnel of lead, under root-raised sidewalks and busted curbs, sifting particulate matter into lobe, nerve-bracked, wave-form, fetal sac. Blood cancers go without saying, speech delays, disorders of breathing, awake and asleep. And now the business concern, formally released from all future responsibility for care and cost. They are done. Imagine being released from the consequences of your worst sin. Bodies are like that, always being taken or taking in.
Thank you for sharing that breathtaking poem
Thank you.
with us all, for being the witness that you are,
Thank you.
for being an interviewee on Poetry.LA. It's been a delight.
Thank you, my
Thank
honor.
you.